In 1949, 4 young black men were accused of raping a white teenager in Florida. One of the Groveland 4 was soon killed by an angry mob, while another was murdered by the county sheriff himself. The other 2 men spent years in prison before they were released on parole. However, there was never any physical evidence to suggest that Charles Greenlee, Walter Irvin, Samuel Shepard, and Ernest Thomas had raped 17-year-old Norma Paget. Regardless, the court of public opinion in the Jim Crow-era South prevailed, and the men were immediately deemed guilty. It wasn't until 2019 that Governor Ron DeSantis issued a posthumous pardon. And by the time the men were officially exonerated in 2021, none of them were alive to witness the occasion. This is the tragic story of the Groveland 4, the men whose lives were cut short by one unfounded accusation. On July 16, 1949, 17-year-old Norma Paget and her husband Willie were driving home from a dance in Groveland, Florida. According to NBC News, Paget claimed that their car stalled and 4 black men stopped and offered to help. The men then allegedly abducted and raped Paget after attacking her husband. Within hours of Paget reporting the assault, Lake County Sheriff Willis McCall had put together a posse. The angry mob marched into black neighborhoods, burning down homes and threatening residents. Samuel Shepard and Walter Irvin were arrested first. The 22-year-old World War II veterans were brutally beaten while police questioned them. Per the African American Registry, officers took them to the scene of the alleged crime and grew frustrated that their shoes didn't match any of the footprints nearby. The police then transported them to jail, handcuffed them to pipes in the basement, and continued to beat them in an effort to force a confession. Charles Greenlee, who was just 16 years old, was arrested soon after Shepard and Irvin. He admitted that he knew Thomas, who was helping him find a job, but he maintained that he'd never even met Irvin or Shepard. Police also viciously beat Greenlee, who ultimately admitted to raping Paget, but only so the battering would stop. When 26-year-old Ernest Thomas became aware of what was happening, he tried to flee. A violent posse of 1,000 white men led by McCall tracked him down a week later. They found him sleeping under a tree in a swamp and proceeded to shoot him more than 400 times. With the Groveland 4 either dead or behind bars, the hysteria started to fade, until it came time for their trials. Greenlee, Irvin, and Shepard faced all-white juries as they attempted to prove their innocence. Unfortunately, their trials were rigged against them from the start. The doctor who had examined Norma Paget after her alleged rape found no evidence of semen or signs of assault, according to the African American Registry. In fact, there was no evidence that she'd even been raped at all. However, a judge refused to allow the Groveland 4's defense to call the doctor as a witness. When Bill Gladson, a state attorney for the 5th Judicial Circuit of Florida, filed a motion to exonerate the Groveland 4 in 2021, he wrote, "The evidence strongly suggests that the sheriff, the judge, and the prosecutor all but ensured guilty verdicts in this case." Despite the lack of any evidence against the Groveland 4, they were all found guilty. According to Black Past, Shepard and Irvin were sentenced to death, while Greenlee received life in prison due to his age. The case incited outrage in the black community, and soon future Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall decided to represent the young men in their appeal for justice. In 1951, the United States Supreme Court overturned the original sentences of Irvin and Shepard due to adverse pretrial publicity and ordered the Florida courts to retry their case. Sheriff McCall was furious. He arranged to transport Shepard and Irvin from the prison where they were being held to the Lake County jailhouse to await the trial. During the nighttime drive, McCall pulled his gun and shot both Shepard and Irvin, killing Shepard. McCall claimed the 2 men had tried to escape. But Irvin told a very different story. According to Irvin, the sheriff had suddenly ordered both men out of the car before shooting them. Per PBS, while Irvin lay on the ground wounded, he heard McCall say on the police radio, "I got rid of them, killed the sons of bitches." When a deputy arrived on the scene and noticed that Irvin was still breathing, he shot the injured man again, this time in the neck. Irvin only survived by playing dead. McCall's premeditated execution of a handcuffed prisoner went without punishment. The coroner's inquiry cleared McCall of any wrongdoing, and even praised the sheriff's actions. Irvin went on to face his retrial alone. Once again, an all-white jury found him guilty of rape and sentenced him to death, though his sentence was eventually commuted to life in prison, when a more moderate governor was elected in 1954. Ultimately, Irvin spent 19 years in prison. He was paroled in 1968, but he died from a heart attack the very next year. Meanwhile, Charles Greenlee was paroled in 1962 after 13 years in prison. Upon his release, he left Florida, never to return. Charles Greenlee was the only member of the Groveland Four to live past 1970, and the only one who lived beyond his 30s. He died in 2012, 7 years before the state pardoned the men in 2019. Greenlee's family had fought for years for the pardon. And then, in 2021, a Florida judge officially exonerated the Groveland Four. We all know how things were back then, Wade Greenlee, the brother of Charles, told the Tampa Bay Times. All you had to do was be black. The reason we're here today is because Irvin didn't die. God allowed him to live to tell the story. Much like the horrific murder of Emmett Till, the Groveland Four case was based on a lie. When NAACP lawyer Franklin Williams investigated the original accusation, he concluded that the Pagets fabricated the story to cover up spousal abuse. Norma's parents had warned Willie not to hit their teenage daughter. Sadly, the injustice of the case stretched well beyond the 4 young men falsely accused of rape. Harry Moore, an NAACP official who fought for Irvin's retrial, and his wife Harriet died in a 1951 bombing of their home because they spoke out against the case. The young men known as the Groveland Four were caught up in an unjust system and paid with their lives. And none of the people responsible for their deaths faced any consequences. The tragic, true story of the Groveland Four stands today as a devastating example of Jim Crow-era racial injustice. The horrific treatment of the Groveland Four was not an isolated incident. Next, read about how Emmett Till's tragic death fueled the civil rights movement. Then, learn about the Central Park Five. Thank you for watching. Like the video if you enjoyed and make sure to subscribe to never miss a video. Check out our other videos for more interesting stories. Until next time.